So, what is burnout? I think burnout is a phrase that's thrown out there a lot. People talk about burnout, especially with their jobs, right? Like, I'm so burnt out. I need some time off. I need to take, I need to quit. I need to change my job. But what exactly is going on when we're in burnout? So, when I work with high achieving women, and they recognize they have, I think we all know burnout has something to do with stress. And so they recognize they have stress. And then they have some symptoms going on in their body, but they don't always relate those two. Um, and that is what I love to teach about, is that helping people to understand that burnout isn't just psychological, isn't just about like the mental, emotional stress that we may be under, but then what is that physically doing in our body? So I use the term burnout to talk about, yes, that stress, but then, okay, what is going on in the body? So I think we've all heard of the term fight or flight. When we encounter a stressor, so something alerts us, right? Our brain perceives that there is stress, like this something I need to respond to. And if we think back to like caveman days, right? That's where fight or flight comes from. So we would maybe encounter a predator or something, and we would have to fight in that situation or flee. Well, we live in modern day culture, obviously. So most of us are not, maybe in physical danger, but we have other types of stressors that are triggering that same response in our brain, that part of our brain that gets alerted to like, there's something I need to deal with. And it's triggering that fight or flight response in our body. And what that fight or flight, I know that fight or flight term, I hear that thrown out there a lot, but what does that actually mean? So fight or flight is like this automatic response in our body where our nervous system kicks in and some things happen. So our adrenal glands release a hormone called cortisol, which floods our bloodstream. So we have cortisol, which does a lot of good things for us when we're under stress. It like increases our blood sugar so that our muscles, our cells have energy in order to fight or flee. It's also going to kick up some chemicals in our brain to allow us to focus, like our adrenaline kicks in, and different things happen in our body with our lungs and our heart. But the problem is, again, we live in modern day society. So the email from the boss on our phone triggers that same response. The call from the kids' school triggers that same response. The fight with your partner triggers that same response. What's interesting is that response is triggered just by our perception of stress alone. So tell me if you can relate to this. Have you ever thought of a situation? Maybe the situation hasn't even happened yet. You're just thinking about what if, right? I have small kids. When I sent my son to preschool for the first time, I was thinking, what if something bad happens to him? Well, our thoughts alone can trigger that fight or flight response in our body. So our body thinks that we are in this stressful situation where we have to fight or flee just from our thoughts alone. So I know there's been times in my life where I like worried about a potential situation that wasn't even happening, and it's flooding my body with all these chemicals, with that cortisol, with that adrenaline, etc. So there is, when we're so we have these stressors from our job or from parenting or, anything that we perceive as stress is going to trigger those, that part of our nervous system where that flood of chemicals comes. So the problem that I find, and where burnout comes in, the problem I find when I work with my clients, again, my clients are high achieving women. They're go-getters. Sometimes they're moms. They either own a business or they, they're high functioning, maybe even over functioning women. And I can totally, I'm raising my hand here. I can totally relate to that. Often when we do our initial call, I'm like, tell me about, what's been going on in your life. And they tell me it's literally been years of stress for them where they, maybe they've had kids. Let's be honest, childbirth, especially if you had traumatic childbirth, the infancy stage, shoot, my kids aren't even infants anymore. That just parenting alone can be a big stressor. Relationship problems, separation, divorce, someone dies. We lived through 2020, right? Often the women that I'm working with, they like tell me, and they kind of say it nonchalantly too, like, oh, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. I'm like, girl, you have had years of a lot of things happening that have taxed your body. So that's where the burnout piece comes in, is like, obviously we live, we're not going to be stress-free in our life. It's not realistic to think we're not going to have any situations come up that are not our preference, right? But the problem is when we don't get relief from those stressors, we're like under stress, under stress, under stress, under stress, and we don't do the things that our body needs in order to down regulate our nervous system, in order to get out of that fight or flight. So that fight or flight is triggered. The problem is our body can only take fight or flight being triggered for so long. If we look at, okay, so cortisol is being triggered, adrenaline is being triggered. Those are very stimulating to the body. And what happens is when we are under stress for a long period of time, our body tries to compensate and like, okay, and we may have where things start getting out of whack, where we may have high cortisol at times and low cortisol at times. But then when, again, we continue to be under stress, eventually we get to what I like to call burnout, which, like, physically burning out is when our body, in order to protect itself, doesn't put out as much cortisol anymore. It's very, very low levels. And if you think about it, it's our body's way of telling us what we need. When we don't have enough cortisol, we need normal levels of cortisol day to day to have energy, to do the things we need to do. But when our body stops putting out that cortisol and our cortisol levels are very, very low, we feel very, very tired. It's our body telling us, like, we need a break. We need to rest. So it's not like, something wrong has happened. It's our body has been saying, like, waving the white flag. And it's like, okay, I really need a break. I really need to be restored physically because of all this stress I've been undergoing. And that's what I find with my clients is, again, they've been under stress for a long period of time, and now they may be either nearing burnout or in burnout when we look at it on the labs. And that's the other thing I want to bring home is, like, you might be listening to this and go, yeah, I think I'm in burnout. I'm like having these issues, so think about those. Adrenaline and cortisol pumping are obviously going to have physical effects in your body. We'll get into that on another episode, but you might go to your regular doctor and talk about this with them, and they will tell you, yeah, well, quit your job, take some time off. They may not necessarily actually test for this or actually look at the symptoms and give you the advice that maybe a functional medicine, functional health root cause medicine practitioner might give you, where we can actually look at testing and we can actually see, what is going on with your hormone levels, if you're nearing or in burnout, and then what to do about it. So I remember my background is in traditional medicine. I do hold a nurse practitioner license. The only time I ever remember in the traditional medicine setting, actually looking for this was in the ICU, where we had people who are obviously, they're in the critical care unit. So literally it's been a life or death situation, whether it was surgery or they had a heart attack or something like that. What we found, eventually we found that they were in burnout. So if we thought about, if we're talking about from this adrenal standpoint, sometimes they would be in burnout after just having a long, intensive ICU stay. So again, just to say, if you hear this episode and you're like, let me go ask my doctor about this, I think this is going on, you might get met with, yeah, take some time off. It's stress. Everybody has it, especially if you're a woman. To speak to that, we actually have data that shows that women just physiologically, female people their resilience is not as robust, I guess I could say, as a male person. We just looking at the science, the pure data, women just need more rest from stress than men do, and women can burn out more easily. We also know that genetically, some people are more predisposed to burnout than others from a genetic standpoint. And then there's other factors that affect burnout too. If we've had trauma or things like that, will affect our ability to handle stress and affect how quickly we get to that burnout stage. So this was just a little high level, what the heck is actually burnout and what's going on. I'm excited to dive into this more in upcoming episodes, but if you had a big takeaway from this, I would love to hear it. You can shoot me a DM on Instagram is probably the best way. I'm just at Lori Aikman. It's linked in the show notes, and I will see you in the next episode.